Morning, good afternoon, or good evening to colleagues and collaborators from across Canada and around the world. Bon matin, bon après-midi ou bonsoir à nos collègues francophones de partout au pays ainsi qu'outre-mer. I want to officially welcome you to the kickoff event for CRDCN 2021. Il me fait grand plaisir de vous souhaiter la bienvenue à ce premier événement de la conférence du RCCDR 2021. For those of you whom I've yet to meet, my name is Michelle Gauthier, and I have the privilege of serving as Special Advisor of the Canadian Research Data Center Network. Je m'appelle Michelle Gauthier et j'ai le privilège de servir en tant que conseillère spéciale du Réseau canadien des centres de données de recherche. The theme of this year's conference is Research, Recovery, and Beyond, Charting a Course for the Future. The world has changed significantly since last we gathered in Halifax in 2019, and even since we met virtually for CRDCN's 20th anniversary conference last fall. What hasn't changed, though, is the ongoing need for and the relevance of the insights provided by CRDCN researchers, as well as the importance of our partnerships with Statistics Canada, 33 institutions across the country, SSHRC, CIHR, and CFI, and a wide array of government, nonprofit, and private sector funders and collaborators. Le thème de notre conférence de cette année est la recherche, la relance et au-delà, tracer un chemin pour l'avenir. Enfin, le monde a beaucoup changé depuis que nous nous sommes rassemblés à Halifax en 2019 ou même depuis que nous nous sommes rencontrés virtuellement en 2020. Ceci dit, ce qui n'a pas changé, c'est l'importance de la recherche qui est faite par les chercheurs du réseau. Les mouvements sociaux et la pandémie ont bien su démontrer la valeur ajoutée de vos efforts ainsi que l'importance de nos partenariats et de notre précieuse collaboration avec Statistiques Canada, le CRSH, la FCI, les IRCS, nos institutions à travers le pays, nos bailleurs de fonds provinciaux et nos partenaires en matière de politique publique. Tout ça est plus important aujourd'hui que jamais. We have a very full and exciting agenda between now and our closing session with the Chief Statistician, Anil Arora, on October 28th. More than 30 domestic and international speakers will share their latest research and policy insights. We hope you'll be able to participate in as many sessions as possible, including the live Q&A and Twitter discussions, and that you will get inspired by the work of some of our emerging scholars. Nous avons un horaire surchargé d'ici le 28 octobre, lorsque le statisticien en chef, Anil Arora, prendra la parole. Plus de 30 conférenciers partageront des nouveautés en recherche et en politique publique. Nous espérons que vous serez des nôtres pour chaque session, que vous participerez aussi aux questions-réponses en direct et aux discussions sur Twitter, et que vous serez inspirés par les travaux des chercheurs émergents. Without further ado, it's now my pleasure to introduce my colleague and my friend, Martin Taylor, CRDCN's Executive Director and a tireless advocate for the network. Martin will present the vision and the plans for the next stage of the network's evolution and growth in the context of renewing the funding for 2023 to 2029, implementing dual access to data, and yes, that means virtual access is on its way, and strategically aligning CRDCN's research, training, and knowledge mobilization efforts. Sans plus tarder, il me fait plaisir de présenter mon collègue et mon ami Martin Taylor, le directeur général et le grand champion du réseau. Martin présentera la vision et les plans pour la prochaine étape de l'évolution et de la croissance du réseau dans le contexte du renouvellement du financement, du double accès, y inclut l'accès virtuel, et de l'harmonisation stratégique des initiatives de recherche, de formation et de mobilisation des connaissances. La présentation de Martin se fera en anglais. Ceci dit, les diapositives seront disponibles en français à la suite de la conférence et il me fera plaisir de soit traduire vos questions ou encore de répondre en français au nom du réseau. Alors, sans plus tarder, Martin, à toi la parole.
Merci beaucoup, Michelle, and thank you to all who have joined us from across the country and beyond today. What I'd like to do in this State of the Network address is actually start on a more personal note, and I hope it'll become clear why in just a moment. I trained as a graduate student in quantitative social science, specializing in urban geography at UBC. I was subsequently appointed to a faculty position in the geography department at McMaster University, where I specialized in my research and teaching on health geography at the nexus, the junction point between social science and health. In the late 90s, I was appointed Vice President Research at the University of Victoria, just a couple of years before this national network was established in 2000. And in 2006, I had the privilege of helping to establish the Research Data Centre at the University of Victoria. In my last 5 years at the University of Victoria, I had a further privilege of being the founding president and CEO of Ocean Networks Canada, which, like the CRDCN, is one of CFI's major science initiatives in Canada. Little could I have realized how these career threads were going to weave together to culminate in the privileged position I have now in leading the Canadian Research Data Centre Network over these last 6 years. Let's look to begin at a snapshot of where we are. So, why do I feel it's such a privilege to lead this network? Well, just look at these figures. I think they speak for themselves. I don't need to repeat them. It's the quantity and quality of the research. It's the strength of the training that we provide to the next generation of quantitative scientists, the relevance of the work that we support for major issues of public policy in Canada, fully evidenced by what you see here on the screen. And that metaphor that I quite often use for our network is that of a bridge. And it's a bridge that is a partnership, and a unique partnership between Statistics Canada and our many university partners across the country to provide access to literally hundreds of microdata files. We're a bridge, in a sense, between two reservoirs. The reservoir of that rich data, and at the same time, the rich reservoir of expertise resident within our researchers and students in our 33 partner universities across the country. We're a conduit as a bridge, data to researchers and researchers to the data. And as such, there is a wonderful strategic alignment between the priorities of Statistics Canada as our national statistical agency and our network, namely optimizing the value and use of data for the benefit of Canada and Canadians. As such, I enjoy support at all levels, as does our network at Statistics Canada. And that begins with the Chief Statistician, Anil Arora, who, as Michelle has mentioned, will be our closing speaker on October the 28th. I meet with him quarterly. One of the Assistant Chief Statisticians serves on our board, Jacques Fouteau. And I have bi-weekly meetings with our colleagues who are Directors General and Directors of the Data Access Division at Statistics Canada. So these are privileged relationships and just underline not just the letter of the agreement that we have with Statistics Canada, but more fundamentally, the spirit of the partnership. Our core business, of course, is supporting research of the highest quality. And it's the breadth and depth of the research that I think is especially striking in our 4 strategic theme areas that you see listed here, but just as importantly, the cross-cutting research, because many of the research contracts and projects that are run on our network are ones that cut across traditional disciplinary boundaries between economics and epidemiology, between sociology and education. And those cross-cutting themes speak for themselves, I think, in terms of their relevance and importance. As I'll come to in a moment, surely the lessons learned from COVID-19, if nothing else, has reinforced the vital importance of the relationships and linkages between social science and health. It's no coincidence that this year's co-recipient of the Nobel Prize in Economics, named this week, David Card, is a CRDCN user and author whose work is exactly of the sort I'm describing, namely cross-cutting, changing our way of thinking about some of the key research to policy issues that have shaped and reshaped the way in which we think about our society. And it's also striking that amongst our research community, we now have no less than 88 of current Canada research chairs across the three disciplinary areas of social science, humanities, health research, and the natural sciences and engineering, drawing upon our data. So this is impressive indeed. Our publications, I think, also speak to our record of productivity, both in terms of its quantity, its quality, and its contributions. Here's just the data from the recent years. You can see consistently in the 300s in terms of the publications being added annually to our bibliography, many in leading journals, and therefore obviously both advancing knowledge and influencing policy in critical ways. We now have over 5,000 entries in our bibliography that have accumulated over the 20-year plus history of our network. And I encourage you to go to our website where you can easily access keyword-based and otherwise those publications to inform you of what has been done and what continues to unfold. One way of looking at these publications is in terms of the theme areas that they speak to. And the numbers here, while not corresponding exactly to the number of publications, but rather indicating the number of references to key health, education, immigration, income, and indigenous issues to which those publications speak. And again, those numbers reinforce the crosscuts and also the prominence of health-related research within the spectrum of the work that is supported through the microdata access that our network enables. I mentioned right at the beginning the importance of our students, and I can't emphasize that enough. Look at these numbers, right? These are the numbers of graduate students who we are currently supporting. Well over a third of the full complement of over 2,100 active researchers on our network now. I mean, this is a tremendous privilege for this network to be able to nurture the next generation of researchers, policymakers, and in other ways, leaders within our country who go out with the skills required in quantitative research and in data science. And the evidence of their success is in the career placements that we have charted in universities, in government, and in various areas in the private and non-government sectors. This is a lovely record to be able to point to, and I think just reinforces for many of us who have been in the academy, for whom the privilege of working with graduate students is one of our highest privileges. To see these numbers is truly exciting. But what underlies this, of course, is funding. And one of the wonderful features of our network is that it provides free access to these unique data that can't be accessed any other way for our partner university researchers and for all of our students. How is this possible? Well, it's possible because of our funding. And I'm going to obviously say a little bit more about this in a minute. But here's the group of key agencies that support us and organizations. And you can see in the pie chart where those funds are coming from. We're particularly, of course, grateful to our two granting councils, CHR and SHERC, that have funded us through a directed grant for a number of years, and CFI that came on board when we became a major science initiative back in 2017. So these are major contributions. Our universities, of course, are major contributors there, as is Statistics Canada through its contributions as well in kind. So these are indeed vital investments. So the ability for us to sustain that free data access is, of course, then the ability to both sustain and grow this support. And this is especially timely as we speak today, because it's literally 2 weeks from today that we submit, sorry, 3 weeks from today. I need not to reduce the time. 3 weeks from today, on November the 4th, that we submit major funding renewal applications built on this very strong record that I'm describing. There's a geography to this network, and that's represented in the fact that we have a presence now in all of Canada's provinces. We added the University of Prince Edward Island to our partner university group just a few weeks ago. That was the only province within which we did not have a presence in the universities. Now we do. And we also have a presence in the north through an institute in Yellowknife. So these are tremendous assets. And quite frankly, I'm not sure rivaled by any other network in quite the same way in Canada in terms of this geographic reach. So we have 33 partner universities, we've got 10 affiliates, and further expansion is fully expected as we move into the next phase of growth and evolution of the network. But I would be remiss, I think, in any of these remarks not to make reference to COVID-19. I know we're all tired of hearing about and having to live with COVID-19, but it's very important for us, I think, to appreciate and understand what's been possible through the network in relation to a response to some of the big issues that COVID-19 has brought our way. We were in a position working with Statistics Canada and working with a number of government departments and agencies, both federal and provincial, to undertake some rapid response targeted projects that spoke directly to some of the policy needs and issues that agencies on the ground were facing. And this has been obviously an important measure, because very often we think about research taking a long time, and it does, and for good reasons it does. But what I think we demonstrated so importantly with these kinds of projects is the ability to bring forward experts and evidence related to key areas of policy in real time. And this is a tremendous asset. And I'll come back to that in just a moment, because this is an international issue as much as it's a national issue. And that is the whole understanding of research infrastructures as crisis response resources. I had the opportunity a few months ago to participate, if we could go to the next slide, Grant, to share our Canadian experience with the international community at an OECD conference. And of course, again, in our virtual world, these connections are made so much more easily. We had, of course, the Australians, we had the Europeans, we had the US and ourselves participating in this conference and sharing our mutual experiences in terms of how research networks, basically database networks of various sorts, including ones like our own, had been able to respond. But the key question was, okay, that was COVID-19, but what about the next crisis? In what ways can we now build upon this experience in order for us then to be positioned and optimized for global challenges that may yet be coming our way? And I think what it's reinforced, and it's not just for our network, I mean, it's for many of the major science initiatives. Of course, the one in Saskatoon was critical in terms of some of the vaccine development. But what it points out is how these major national investments in research facilities and research networks are resources for the country. As important as they are for obviously research, first and foremost, and their training, It's this ability to draw upon these resources at all times, but especially in times of need, that just reinforces how valuable they truly are. So let's move on, because as I've said, we are now at a critical time in terms of the evolution and growth of our network that is critically dependent, of course, on sustaining the funding support that has made access to these data essentially freely available to our researchers and our students in our network. 3 weeks from today, as I said earlier, applications will go in to renew our funding, both through the Canada Foundation for Innovation Major Science Initiative program and through our directed grant to our two councils, Canadian Institutes for Health Research and the Social Sciences Matters Research Council. And in those applications, we're leveraging not only the strength of our research community and the training, obviously, that we're doing, but equally our relationships with our provincial and federal partners, from whom we're drawing testimonials in order to, again, reinforce the importance of what we are doing and will be doing. It's not just simply, of course, talking about past record as if we can rest on our laurels and just assume that the funding is renewed, but rather to point forward and say ways in which we can build on those strengths and grow our capacity and provide new and expanded linkages to data, and as a consequence, not only advance knowledge in critical areas of the sort we've already described, but then through that, enhance our collaboration with various agencies in government and elsewhere to lubricate that vital linkage between research for policy. A critical piece of that is, of course, the future of data access. And that is, I think, as Michelle mentioned in her introductory comments, a very critical part of what's going to be possible to do what's on this slide now, namely to move us from dependence on physical access to the data, which has been the history in our partner universities with their research data centers to date, to one where we have dual access, the combination of physical access and remote access in secured spaces to the data, including the ability to work from home offices. This is, for many, I think, in our research community, and I've heard this, of course, repeatedly for obvious and good reasons, the Holy Grail. The ability to have fundamentally easier access to these rich data. At the same time, balancing that critical pendulum between, on the one hand, guardianship of the data because of the security and confidentiality that has to surround these microdata, at the same time as stewarding them, making sure that they are used in ways that then build upon what largely, of course, is a public investment, because it's public funds that by and large are paying for many of the data files that come to us through Statistics Canada. Again, I come back to the relationship between the network and Statistics Canada in this context. About 1.5 years ago now, we formed a joint task force at senior levels between our two organizations to plan and model the ways in which our initiatives can ensure then that the future of data access is optimized through the platforms that we're developing. In our own case, what we are calling our virtual research data center platform, that is a step change in all sorts of ways, not only in terms of being able to provide remote as well as physical access through the research data centers, but a step change in computational power and storage capacity to take and accommodate the big data files that are coming to us. We've just received, for example, very massive business data files, and that's just the beginning of an increasing avalanche of rich data that's coming, some of which was anticipated in our last federal budget in terms of investments in a disaggregated data access plan and program that will now be in the pipeline and bringing new data of critical sorts to us as a research community. So fortunately, there's an excellent coincidence here in that the timeline for the full implementation of this new data access system coincides perfectly with the renewal timeline, in the sense that funding renewal begins as of April 1st, 2023, even though the application goes in 3 weeks' time. The funding renewal itself is 2023 through to 2029. And that coincides, as I say, almost exactly with the full implementation of this new IT platform. And so it strengthens, obviously, our case considerably in terms of the growth potential for the network over this critical next period, 6-year period of funding that's now in view. So how does this all translate then into value? Because ultimately, technologies are means to an end. They're a means to an end in terms of obviously enabling the best research and the best researchers to use the data that are available. But ultimately, the value propositions that matter most are value propositions to the country when one's talking about investments in a national research network. And we are extremely well positioned, I think, in terms of that value proposition in various respects, supporting, of course, the COVID-19 recovery, recognizing, of course, the massive investments that have been made, quite understandably, in economic, social, health, and other programs, and how then we engineer and in other ways deal with the ramifications of then coming out of that period, and how do we best manage our economy and our society as a consequence of all that's happened by reason of those massive perturbations in our economy and our society. A critical piece of what we're so well positioned to address, which is so high, quite rightly, on our public agenda at all levels, whether it's in the federal government, our provincial governments, in our funding agencies, in our universities, and elsewhere, is equity, diversity, and inclusion. Because sadly, one of the things that, of course, has been horribly exposed through COVID especially, is that the vulnerable are vulnerable. And when worst case scenarios happen, which COVID-19 obviously is in that category, the vulnerable are all the more vulnerable. And how do we then address those issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion that in some senses, albeit an incremental and oftentimes all too slow a process, level the playing field across social groups? So those inequities, lack of diversity and lack of inclusion are remedied. And fundamental to that is advancing population health and well-being. And while obviously those areas that I described earlier in terms of areas of research cover many pillars within the social sciences, so much of that in some way or another, either directly or not too indirectly, ultimately culminates in the implications for what is broadly defined as population health and well-being. Whether we're looking at income, whether we're looking at education, whether we're looking at immigration, you name it, they come down very often to advancing population health and well-being. And so our value proposition is situated there. And it's no surprise, as I showed earlier, how many of our research publications speak to this, either directly or indirectly. And in so doing, obviously, we're positioned, as I've already evidenced through the COVID-19 examples, to use research to inform policy. Long gone now is the old way of doing that. Namely, our researchers working laudably independently, but no longer just throwing research results over a wall and hoping somebody on the policy side of the wall will catch them and maybe make some use of them, but rather to work upstream, to bring the policy voices and the researcher voices together to formulate the questions to begin with, so that mutual benefit and mutual objectives are served. So it's not only then bringing research to policy, it's bringing policy priorities to researchers. And I think this gives you some sense of why the value proposition to the country of a national network of our sort is so profound. But I want to come back in closing to people, because we've talked a lot about the productivity and the contributions of our research community, the processes to some degree that enable us to support that through funding. But ultimately, it's all about the people who do it and the people who support it. First and foremost, our research community of over 2,100 researchers and close to 800 graduate students that I mentioned earlier. Those are our principal players. But I would be remiss if I didn't underline how ably and wonderfully supported we all are in that community by those who are our board of directors and our central staff team. Our board is a board to die for, quite frankly, in terms of the expertise, experience, and commitment, bringing together that perfect blend for wise counsel and due diligence of independent external directors and senior academic directors and leaders from our research community. I won't obviously belabor the list, but just scan your eye down that list and just look at the placements of those people, the senior positions of several of them within government or within Statistics Canada or within our universities. And I do want to especially recognize Andrew Baring, who was my board chair actually at Ocean Networks Canada and wasn't sufficiently distressed by me to not accept becoming board chair for our network when I joined the network back in 2016. And Andy's contributions are manifold, his commitment is unwavering, and the same can be said for Janet Hallowell, who in her last full-time position, although she still worked over full-time, was as the Executive Vice President of SSHRC. So, I mean, this is the caliber of people, Andy having previously been President and CEO of Canary. This is where you're drawing, you know, that wise counsel and that guidance that not only benefits the management team that report to them, but of course the full network and the linkages to key stakeholders across the community, whether that's in the academic sector, the government sector, private sector, or elsewhere. So I just want to thank through this medium that board of directors and Andy and Janet especially for their leadership. Janet will be taking over as chair of the board when Andy completes his term in just about a year's time. And then if I turn to our staff, one of the wonderful privileges for me over these last 6 years has been to grow and work with a highly qualified and dedicated central staff team. We've been extremely fortunate. We're a small, but as Michelle often says, small but mighty team, which obviously is a bit of a self-claim, but I'll claim it. And just again, want to applaud all who were listed on this list today, who are working, frankly, overtime in so many ways to ensure that the network is supported centrally in the way that it needs to be across our 4 major portfolios of research programs and training, finance and operations, communications, and IT. And really a handout to each of those listed here, working, of course, with a distributed staff made up both of Statistics Canada staff who are stationed in each of the research data centers across the country, as well as some of the support staff for the RDCs out of the university staff themselves. So while this is the central team, it's obviously part of a much larger staff support across the nation. So in closing, I hope I've given you enough evidence to say as we look forward with all of these exciting prospects, enabled by the IT advances, enabled by the rich data that's already here but still coming in larger quantity, that we're wonderfully positioned to build on our strengths, not complacently, but confidently. And in so doing, to capitalize on the major investments made by so many, whether it by cash or by kind, in our network that's enabled it to grow and to flourish for 20 years. And our ability then to go beyond where we are even now in terms of promoting partnerships that will have a tremendous effect on our ability to be all the more relevant and vital in terms of the contributions that our leading research and researchers make to the country. And as such, raise the profile nationally and internationally of this network so that we are indeed internationally competitive as a global leader in the distribution of these vital data at the nexus of social science and health. Michelle, thank you. Merci beaucoup à tous. Michelle, back to you.
Thank you so much, Martin. Well, if you had need of any proof of my opening comments in terms of evidence of a tireless advocate and a champion for the network, I trust that address puts any of those issues to rest. Martin, thank you so much for the overview that you've provided, both retrospectively and prospectively, as we move forward. I want to invite colleagues from across the country and indeed from anywhere around the world to now send in any questions that you might have. This is a rare opportunity you have to have the executive director in essence on the hot seat for the next several minutes to answer any of your pressing questions that you may have. And before you put your questions to him, I will note that no, he doesn't have an exact moment when you personally will be able to have your remote access, but we'll be able to tell you that as of June 2023, as he mentioned, that remote access will be coming to a community near you. But we welcome any questions that you might have, and our colleagues will make us aware of them as they come in. In the meantime, Martin, I might ask you to perhaps speak a little bit more to the efforts that have been underway over the last, I would say, 5 or 6 years to move from a transactional relationship with the research community to a more transformational one. And so rather than have researchers solely engaging with the local RDC and often in isolation, how you see with the coordination and engagement of the network centrally, we have sought to transform that relationship in terms of new opportunities with the emerging scholars program, communities of practice, etc.
Well, thanks, Michelle. A great question. So yes, I think if we look back over the 20-year history and the reasons why the network was established back in 2000, it was to bring data to researchers. And as I said earlier, it's a two-way relationship. It's data to researchers, but it's researchers to data. And in so doing, particularly in terms of taking the researchers to the data, I think what we're centrally trying to do with our partners in government especially, but not just in government, as I said earlier, is bring them together to forge and co-create questions that are at that critical cusp between advancing research and informing policy. And that's the transformational piece, I think, vitally. It's bringing people around the same table. And as you know, we've done that very deliberately. I'll just give you one example. A couple of years ago, we had supported a program of activity using the Aboriginal Peoples Survey. And we brought together around a table about 60 people, leaders in Aboriginal research, and including Aboriginal and Indigenous groups, to inform the ways in which together we best address some of these issues using the best data available to us. And then working going forward now with the First Nations Indigenous Governance Council and so on. I mean, these are just one example of how then bringing key people together around the same table, whether it's virtually these days or physically as previously, you are then creating a forum, which is a forum for transformation, to use your word, rather than simply, well, I'm glad I've got the data. And for a central team, what that of course involves is plans to actually systematically think about ways in which those opportunities can be created. So our board has approved a collaborative research program plan, a training plan, a knowledge mobilization plan, which are, in my view, pillars to enable that transformation to progress. And it's not as if we're drawing unwilling horses to water. And that's been the encouraging thing for me. You know, when I first came into this job, there were perhaps some who said, well, that's really not the business we're in. You know, we're independent researchers, and you know, we don't really want to necessarily get involved with these kinds of, again, more transformational relationships and partnerships. I'm not hearing that. And, you know, and I'm not saying that's just because of COVID and everybody now realizes why research for policy is all the more important. I think it was there before that. And I'm especially encouraged, and I'll finish with this, that I'm seeing in the new generation of graduate students and early career researchers an appetite for working at that nexus.
Yes, I agree with you, Martin, and we've certainly seen that in our National Policy Challenge, as well as other opportunities that have been afforded. We've had a few questions come in here, so one of them is a fairly specific one, but I think it speaks to our efforts, Martin, to democratize access and to enable access beyond the current group of partner institutions. So we have one of the conference participants who's asking, I wonder after I graduate from my PhD program, whether I will still have access to the RDC if I'm not affiliated with another university. And so perhaps you could just speak about how, in partnership with Statistics Canada, we're trying to extend that access irrespective of university affiliation going forward.
Yeah, I mean, and this of course speaks directly to dual access and the opportunities for remote access. So we're seeing this as a liberating development, right? And I say that not just because of the network self-interest, but also Stat Canada. So as you'll hear from Anil, I'm sure, on October 28th, they share as much, if not more, than we do, the importance of making these data available and used. Otherwise, that investment is lost. So I think stay tuned on that one. We are definitely moving to enable that to happen in a way that does not depend then on that physical access to the facility, regardless of what that appointment might ultimately be.
Thank you, Martin. And we do have another related question with regards to virtual access. This one in French. Vers quelle date l'accès virtuel aux données sera-t-il disponible? Et je peux peut-être répondre en français puis ensuite en anglais. Alors, tel que j'ai mentionné au début, on n'a pas une date exacte par chercheur, mais l'engagement est de fournir le service à travers le pays par le mois de juin 2023. Alors, on est à moins de 18 mois d'accès à travers le pays. Il va y avoir accès en forme de projet pilote, etc., dans les mois et l'année à venir. So I was just saying that we were asked a question about when virtual access would be available. And as Martin, I think you mentioned in your presentation, we're looking at having the country completely connected as of June 2023. And there will be institutions coming on, in essence, over the next 18 months in an order that makes sense for local institutions and in light of the expansion of the system. But I know most researchers would love to have remote access as of yesterday, and we certainly are cognizant of that, and we've been moving as fast as we can. We should also probably note, Martin, that in fact the original design didn't include the remote access piece, and in fact through the work with Statistics Canada we've been able to expedite that effort. And so the other question that was asked, and the two might actually go together. One is, in what area, Martin, will the new data linkages be? And the other is, could you elaborate some of the new CRDCN communications initiatives under consideration as StatsCan's disaggregated data action plan is slated to lead a cultural shift across several data sets in the next years. So maybe you could speak a little bit about the thematic areas that we're looking at and even referencing in the renewal proposal on both these fronts. And I'm sure, as you mentioned, Anil will speak more to the specific data sources when he is with us on the 28th.
Well, thank you. And it's an excellent question. Well, both questions are excellent. In terms of research foci that both register with where the research community is at, where some of the key policy issues are at, and where the data are at. There are several, I think. The whole issue of social determinants of health is a central one, and richer data are coming in that regard. The whole question that, again, I've emphasized of equity, diversity, and inclusion, including Indigenous questions and more data in that regard. And in fact, right now, we have, as you know, a program underway with Indigenous Services Canada using some of the most recent data in that regard. So the new data will allow us to do that. The business data that's already come. And the question, I think quite rightly, of course, said, well, how are these being linked? Which I know for many of our researchers is a key issue, because they are looking at cross-cutting questions. And so the ability to link all the more, the social data with the health data, the income data with health outcome data, that is a key focus for that. And as you say, I'm sure Anil will speak to that more critically. So social determinants of health, equity, diversity, and inclusion, business data as it relates to economic recovery. These are all things that then both the data that's just come, as well as that's in the pipeline through, as you say, the disaggregated data action plan, will help to fuel. In terms of the communications, it's an excellent question. We've just launched a new website that's a key part of our ability to be more accessible and user-friendly, we trust. And again, plaudits to our staff and our supporters at McMaster who have enabled that to happen. So, and we, through the group now that Ryan Murphy is leading in communications, we have increased our social media presence. We've using newsletters more effectively, I believe, etc., etc. There's a regularity now, as well as a frequency to the way in which we're reaching out, so that our community is all the better informed of opportunities, as well as obviously informing us what they're doing, so that we can give all the more profile to it.
Thank you, Martin. And maybe I will suggest that if anyone has any burning questions, that you put them into the Q and answer, and we'll get to them as soon as possible. I have another for you, though. I thought, Martin, it might be interesting for you to speak a little bit about how researchers' input is informing the renewal submission. So we know we've had 2 national town halls. We have the researcher survey that we're so very thankful so many of you completed. And then we had a special survey as well, specifically on some of the expectations and needs. So maybe you can just speak a little bit to that so folks know the extent to which that input has been invaluable.
Absolutely, and thank you for raising it, Michelle. So the network central staff, believe me, does not in any way operate as an isolated team cut off from the rest of the world. Just the opposite. We're reaching out as much as we reasonably can. As you say, we've got a researcher survey that annually goes out, and thank you for those in the community who are listening today who filled that out so conscientiously, because it had a lot of new information in it that's proved invaluable exactly for what you're talking about, Michelle, which is to inform our funding renewal applications in terms of the significance and impact of the research. As you say, we did reach out through town halls and through surveys to make sure we were understanding where the research priorities and other priorities of our community were at, so that they could get reflected. But we've also reached out beyond that to the researchers, to the institutions. I've just come off literally a week of speaking to all of the vice presidents of our partner universities, and having done that with you, a few weeks before with our academic directors, many of whom were again on the line with our vice presidents last week, so that we are recognizing and aligning what we're doing, not only with the strategic priorities of the researchers, but also with the strategic priorities of the universities. And frankly, it's an easy alignment, because many of the key issues that are top of our priority agenda are top of their strategic research plans, or more broadly, their institutional plans.
Thank you, Martin. Well, I think we will wrap up there. Thank you to everyone for participating today. We've really enjoyed having you with us. Looking forward to you being involved in the upcoming sessions as well on October 18th at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. We will have our next session, Pandemic Recovery and Beyond, What the Data Can Tell Us. Spotlight on Employment and Income, and it will feature Naomi Lightman of the University of Calgary, Stéphanie Lewis of the University of Waterloo, Pierre Brochu de l'Université d'Ottawa et Stéphane Brault from McGill. Alors, j'aimerais remercier tout le monde d'avoir été des nôtres aujourd'hui, tant nos chercheurs que nos collègues au niveau des politiques publiques, tant au Canada qu'à l'international. Thank you to everyone for your participation, our researchers, our policy experts, as well as our colleagues internationally. And again, want to thank Martin for the excellent address, which will be reflected, you can be sure, in the federal funding renewal proposal that he is leading at the moment. And we hope to have good news for you over the course of the remainder of this fiscal year and beyond, in terms of many more exciting new developments. And thank you for all the ways that you have supported and engaged with the network. It really is an amazing partnership. So thank you, Martin, and thank you to all the team who helped put on today's session, and we wish you all a good continuation of your day wherever you find yourself. Take care, everyone, and be well.
Merci beaucoup à tous.
Au revoir.
Merci. Au revoir.